They say a single moment can tilt the whole world. When Hana Mira stepped out of her apartment that morning, she carried in her hands more than a leather folder. She carried the weight of months of small decisions, of late nights learning lines, of skipping dinners so her rent would be paid, of promises whispered to her little brother that she would not let their mother lose the house. Hana is gentle but stubborn, practical and full of quiet ambition. She works 2 jobs and still rehearses scripts at midnight because her dream needs a voice and the city is loud. Rafael Ortega is a stranger she has never met. His life, by most measures, looks tidy and finished. He runs a community arts collective that once was a small theater and now trains young people to tell stories about the parts of life nobody writes songs about. People in town respect him, but also keep a distance because he makes decisions that change how money moves in the neighborhood. He is exacting and kind in ways that surprise those who meet him. The morning breeze smelled like rain, and the bus hummed like a tired beast. Hana clutched the folder with the sides of her fingers and practiced a line under her breath. The audition was for a role that could mean steady income and a path into professional theater. She had prepared for every possible question, except the one life might ask when it refused to follow script. At the intersection, traffic began to crawl. A car in the median had its lights flashing and people were stepping out, raising voices. A man in a wrinkled suit paced beside a small van, his brow tight. Something about him made Hana look twice. Not because of his clothes, but because of the way he kept checking a photograph on his phone and then looking up as if searching the faces in the river of commuters. Their bus groaned as it started to move again and then stopped. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance. Hana checked her watch. 20 minutes. She had planned every second so she could be early and calm. She told herself to not let panic leak into her voice. Then a toddler in the seat ahead began to cry, and a woman stood to calm the child. Leaning too far and dropping a small bag that spilled oranges across the aisle, the shaken woman cursed softly. Hana moved to help pick them up. As she reached down, a voice outside asked for help in a quiet, surprised way. Hana turned and saw the man from the median. His face was not famous, but it was steady and a little stunned. His van would not start. He had a stack of flyers that bent at the corners, a coffee cooling on the curb, and an expression that said he was late for a very important thing. The instinct was older than the plan. Hana's father had taught her that if you can offer a hand, you offer it. It was not always a noble choice. Sometimes it costs a missed opportunity. She hesitated only a moment, then stood and stepped off the bus. The driver watched the street and shook his head, annoyed. The city seemed to hold its breath. Hana walked down to the man and said she could try. She knew basic engine things. In those evenings, fixing old radios with her father, she had learned to listen for what a machine wanted. He smiled with surprise and relief. His name was Rafael. His voice had a sound like theater curtains rustling. He thanked her and offered her money, and then, when she refused, he handed her a small, folded note on which he had written a time and place, and the words, "You owe me a coffee." Helping him took longer than the 5 minutes she had told herself it would need. The battery was dead, and then a loose cable threw them into a small argument with a tow truck driver who wanted more money than anyone should pay at 8 in the morning. By the time the van started, Hana watched her watch and knew the audition was gone. The theater would be strict. She walked back to the bus stop with Rafael, and they shared a short conversation about bad luck and stubbornness. He invited her to the theater's workshop that evening as a way to make up for the trouble. She laughed and said maybe, and then she did something that in other stories would be labeled reckless. She let the loss sink into her chest and decided she would not let it define her returning home that day. Hana found her younger brother, sorting through unpaid bills with a measured sadness that had become their household's second language. Their mother, still recovering from illness, slept in a chair by the window. Hana sat with the folder on her lap and felt a quiet, unfamiliar sense of peace. She had done something her father would have been proud of. When she closed her eyes, she replayed Raphael's grateful face. In the top pocket of her coat, she found the folded note with the time and place and the words, "You owe me a coffee." The irony made her smile. The next day, life turned in a way she did not expect. Raphael's theater, known as the Tide House Cooperative, had a display in the coffee shop near her route. A poster showed a call for actors and technicians, with a line that read, "We tell the stories others forget." Hana paused. Destiny, if she believed in that sort of thing, had a sense of humor. She stepped inside and ordered a coffee. The barista handed her a cup with a paper sleeve that had the theater's logo. Raphael was there, speaking to a group of teenagers who had eyes like stars, excited, nervous, alive. He saw Hana across the room and waved in the way of someone who knew how to make a stranger feel welcome. What came next was neither sudden nor miraculous. Raphael recognized Hana's sharp audition folder as she had left it on the bench and returned it with a gentle smile. He asked if she had missed her audition. When she nodded, he did not offer pity. Instead, he asked if she would audition for the Tide House's community piece that evening. The role was smaller, but it paid, and it came with training and access to a network that could change her life. Hana hesitated because the wound of the missed opportunity still ached. But the theater's lights smelled like possibility, and Raphael's invitation felt like more than luck. She said yes. That night, under a stage light that hummed like a friendly insect, Hana met people who breathed stories into the air and made them sacred. She learned stage blocking, voice control, and how to make silence speak. Raphael watched from the wings, not with the distance of a critic, but with the attention of someone who had placed a high value on listening. By the time she returned home, breathless with new practice and with a check in her hand, Hana thought about choices in a different way. She had given up an interview that might have led to security and instead had offered kindness to a stranger who turned out to carry a door. In the weeks that followed, the Tide House became both stage and classroom for Hana. She learned the rhythms of teamwork, the business of community art, and the practice of telling hard truths without violence. People noticed her work ethic and a quiet bravery that showed in small acts on and off stage. Raphael gave her small tasks and then larger ones. Sometimes he pushed her. Sometimes he let her fail and then coached her through the recovery. A rumor spread that a producer from a regional festival had seen Hana rehearse and had been impressed. When Hana thought of the day she missed the audition, she no longer felt wasted minutes. She felt a map redrawn, and yet tension lived beneath the new routine. Raphael carried a set of decisions about how the theater should grow and whether to accept certain funding that could change the cooperative soul. Some nights the two of them argued, voiced low and thoughtful, about loyalty and survival. It was not always pleasant, but the push and pull made Hana understand that life is a series of negotiations, not only with others, but with your own values. As the curtain fell on a weekend performance, Hana left the theater and found a small envelope pinned to her locker. Inside was a note from Raphael that said, "Come to the office on Tuesday. Bring nothing but your honesty." Tuesday arrived like a page turned. Hana walked into the Tide House office and found Raphael waiting with 2 mugs of tea in a calm that seemed planned. He spoke first about the festival. A producer had indeed been present and had admired the rawness the cooperative produced. They offered a slot, but with conditions. The cooperative need to scale up production and accept a sponsorship that came with creative constraints. Raphael described the money and the people behind the sponsorship in plain language. They would buy sets and lighting, and in return expect certain messaging in the shows. This was an offer many would consider a miracle. To Hana, who had watched bills pile on the kitchen table, it was tempting. Rising from the small table, Raphael asked Hana how she felt about the idea of a trade. He wanted not only her opinion, but her help to decide. Hana listened and felt a sudden, fierce loyalty to the theater's original voice. She also imagined her mother sitting with a steady check at the end of the month, and her brother enrolling in a class without fear. The decision pressed on her like hands on one of those stage curtains she had learned to pull. Raphael watched her and nodded. He said the cooperative had to survive without selling its truth. And yet he admitted the reality of payroll and rent and the need to keep doors open. The discussion opened a new layer of the its relationship between them. Raphael revealed he had once taken a similar sponsorship early in his career and had lost a play because the sponsor's demands had hollowed it out. It had taken him years to earn back trust. He did not want the cooperative to repeat his mistake. Hana shared memories of her father teaching her to fix a radio by listening to the static. She spoke of the day she missed her big audition and how the Tide House had become an unexpected doorway. Their conversation went past business and into the territory of fear and memory and the fragile ways humans try to protect what they love. Outside, the city pulsed on. Inside the Tide House, a map of possible futures lay across the table. They called a meeting with other members of the cooperative. Voices rose, arguments surfaced, and compromises were suggested. Some members wanted growth at any cost. Others feared losing the cooperative's grit. Rafael proposed a middle path. Accept a smaller sponsorship with clear contract clauses that preserved creative control. He would negotiate fiercely, he said. Hana volunteered to help by drafting terms that were straightforward and fair. The offer changed focus from money to language and from fear to negotiation. As Hana worked late into the night redlining contracts and talking to legal aid people who offered their time for free, she learned another type of strength. It was not the loud kind that filled a theater and made people stand, but a careful, sustained endurance. Rafael sat across from her with a lamp that made a pool of light. Sometimes they did not speak, but only shared the exhaustion and the certainty that they were doing something that mattered. He told stories about his mother who had taught him to play a violin, and about a small theater in a coastal town that had kept its dignity by refusing one large grant. Hana told him about childhood mornings, when breadcrumbs made an easy breakfast, and about the conviction that life must be made beautiful, even if only by the stories we tell. Rumors arrived, and the pressure of the festival sharpened. One evening, a local journalist published a piece that framed Rafael as a man willing to sell out for fame. The article used words that hurt and left the cooperative reeling. Some donors withdrew, other artists felt betrayed, and a few members wanted to fold. Hana felt the sting of anger not only for Rafael but for herself. She had walked through the city offering her small kindnesses, and yet the world had a way of turning generosity into a scandal. In the storm of public opinion, Rafael did something unexpected. He invited community members to a listening circle on the theater floor. People came with grief and fury and memories. They spoke of plays that had made them feel seen and of nights when they had nowhere else to go. When it was Hana's turn, she spoke of the day she had missed the audition and how the cooperative had given her life a second chance. The listening circle did not erase the damage, but it softened the edges. Rafael's willingness to be present without a script earned him some trust back. He had a way of standing in the room and holding space for others that felt less like performance and more like shelter. Hana found herself looking at him in a new light. He was not only the man who had been stranded on the side of the road, he was a person with a history that included missteps and a deep desire to preserve a place for honest expression. She saw his decisions as complicated and human, and was less willing to let a headline define him. One night, after a successful benefit performance that raised enough to cover the rent for 2 months, Rafael and Hana walked outside into a city that smelled like winter. They spoke in low voices about small things, and then about the strange alchemy of choice. Rafael admitted he had watched Hana that morning. She helped him, and that the way she had chosen kindness instead of calculation had made him reconsider what he wanted to fund in the world. Perhaps, he said, he wanted to invest in people who did not see their worth only in profit. Hana laughed and said she had been foolish and stubborn, and also that she had found a place where her voice mattered. The exchange felt like a turning key. As the cooperative stabilized, opportunities arrived. The festival offered a modest residency and an invitation for Hana to join. A writers' group to develop a piece about small acts that make big changes. The work pushed her to write scenes from memory and to stand again on the rehearsal floor with new confidence. Rafael continued to negotiate funding with cautious optimism. Their relationship moved in the small and meaningful ways that build trust. Late-night tea shared after a rehearsal. A hand reached for in a moment of vulnerability, critique offered with tenderness. The town began to speak about the Tide House as a place where art grew out of life and where decisions reflected values. And yet, beneath the steady work, there was a question that neither of them spoke aloud. Could a life built on second chances lead to a future where both security and truth lived together? Rafael carried the fear of losing what he had fought to create. Hana carried the fear of watching her family struggle again. They both learned to hold two truths at once, that survival sometimes demanded compromise, and that compromise, without principle, became its own kind of surrender. The path ahead was uncertain, and the work of reconciling need and integrity would require more than clever contracts. It would require courage and a willingness to risk comfort for something truer. Months passed, and seasons of rehearsal turned into seasons of new work. Hana's voice matured on stage and in writing. Her brother began a night class paid for by the small stipend she earned. Her mother received the care she needed without nights of worry. These changes were slow and not without setbacks, but they arrived because people in the cooperative chose to keep showing up. Rafael continued to ask difficult questions about growth and ethics, sometimes pushing the team to the edge of what they could imagine. In quiet moments, they both reflected on how a single act of help had shifted trajectories. One afternoon, a director from a city theater came to see a presentation. She stayed after, eyes shining with a kind of hunger. She said the piece had honesty and grit, and asked if Hana would consider writing a longer work about small choices and their ripple effects. The offer included a workshop stipend and a promise to bring the piece to a wider stage if it resonated. Hana felt the familiar coil of fear around her chest. Success had a history of demanding more than she could give. Yet when she looked at Rafael, who had been in the audience and who now stood at the back with a quiet smile, she felt a solidity she had not expected. She agreed. The months of writing were brutal and kind. Hana wrote scenes about mornings and late buses, about hands offering help, about the cost of time and the currency of attention. She wrote characters who were neither saints nor villains, but human beings making the smallest of choices and learning what those choices meant. The director worked with her to sharpen the narrative, and the cooperative offered support by staging readings. The residency gave Hana time and a small safety net. She learned to translate everyday moments into scenes that could bend an audience's heart and change their way of seeing as the piece developed. The community noticed a shift in Hana. She became a storyteller, not only of other people's moments but of her own life. She spoke publicly about the morning. She missed the audition and about the man whose van had failed and whose generosity had been to open a door. She never framed Rafael as a savior. Instead, she spoke of mutual rescue, of the way that people in a city full of noise can find one another and help build a place that listens. Audiences leaned forward when she told those parts of the story because they recognized the truth in it. Rising pressure arrived in the form of an offer from a larger corporate sponsor that promised national exposure and a large payment. The sponsor wanted certain lines added to the script and an easier ending. Some members of the cooperative wanted to accept. Rafael called a meeting and asked everyone to read aloud the proposed changes. The room listened to soften conflict and then fell into silence. Hana felt the old fear return. It was the same fork in the road dressed in different clothing. She could picture stability and a wider platform. She could also picture the story she had written being trimmed into a version that would not sing. That night, Rafael waited until late and then walked to Hana's small flat with 2 mugs of tea. He found her awake, notes scattered like leaves. They sat and talked about what it meant to hold power. He said he had made a list of possibilities and was prepared to risk a contract to protect the cooperative's voice. She looked at him and saw a man who had learned from his past and who now practiced courage differently. Hana realized she had been rescued not by one person but by a culture of people who refused to abandon principle when profit arrived. The final decision was not dramatic. They negotiated and declined the large sponsor, choosing instead a smaller partnership that allowed them to reach new audiences while keeping the work intact. It required tightening budgets and more late nights, but the cooperative retained its heart. The director's production proceeded and the city theater offered Hana a stage for her piece. Opening night arrived and the theater filled. Hana stood backstage and felt every pair of hands that had helped her steady the boards. Rafael squeezed her shoulder and said nothing. She stepped into the light and told the story of small acts with a steady voice. After the curtain, people lined up to speak with her. Some cried, some laughed, and some said their own small choices had been honored by the performance. A woman in the front row told Hana she had decided to forgive a family member after seeing the play. A young man said he would enroll in a poetry class. The play did not change the world overnight, but it shifted a few hearts, and those hearts would carry something new into their days. Hana knew then that the work mattered because it connected in the months that followed. Hana's life changed in ways both ordinary and profound. She earned enough to help her family, and her writing reached other theaters. Rafael continued to guide the cooperative with a steadier hand and a new kind of humility. Their relationship grew into partnership and friendship, and sometimes, in the quiet spaces between rehearsals, into something gentler. They learned to name gratitude without allowing it to become a debt. They built systems in the cooperative to protect artists and to share power. The community learned that growth did not require surrender and that generosity could be practical and effective. Years later, standing in a small classroom at the Tide House, Hana told new members the story of the morning she missed the audition. She did not present it as a fairy tale. She told it as a ledger of choices. She said that kindness sometimes costs you the chance of a lifetime, but that the life you build afterward can be the truer prize. She spoke of a man who had been stranded and of a community that had refused to sell its voice. When a young actor asked how to choose between survival and principle, Hana smiled and said, "Listen to the kind of future you want to build, and then act like someone who can live in it." The audience that night was small and the light was soft. Rafael sat in the back with calloused hands and eyes that shone. The cooperative hummed with the simple work of people creating meaning together. Hana felt the echo of her father's lesson and the shape of a city that had taught her to both hold fast and let go. The story had changed them both and many others, not because it had a single hero, but because people had chosen to be present. In the end, that was the kind of life Hana wanted to keep telling stories about.